Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Phil Mackesy.
James Quinn is online at theburningplatform.com, and he's also on Facebook and Twitter. Got to remind you up front, Jim is not just another blogger. He's a certified public accountant and a certified cash manager. So when Jim talks, we listen, right, Jim?
I hope so.
It's good to have you back on This Week in Money. Been a great year so far if you own stocks. If you're one of the 20% who do, the Dow and the S&P, Jim, at a record territory. So are U.S. unemployment claims. They just hit a 4-month high. A huge disconnect here. It's one thing to believe what you hear and read in the media. It's another to drive around in the real world like you do. Tell us what you're seeing, Jim, in your part of the world. That's Montgomery County in north central Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said about today's unemployment claims, they were at a 4-month high, but as soon as they came out with the announcement, they immediately tried to spin it, saying it's related to Easter and seasonal adjustments, and it seems like the mainstream media and the government, every time a bad number comes out, they immediately have some sort of spin on it to make it seem like it's not as bad.
And we know exactly why they're doing that.
Because it is bad.
Sure. So tell us how bad it is.
There was also another report that came out today from Challenger and Gray. It's a company that announces the layoffs that are happening in the country. And their March layoffs were 30% higher than the layoffs last March. How could the economy be recovering if layoffs are going up by 30%? And then immediately they tried to spin it, saying it must be this terrible sequester. But when you dig into the numbers, only like 1,000 or 1,400 government employees were part of the 49,000 layoffs.
Yeah, that sequester hasn't had much impact on the government, has it?
It's a fake. There is no problem. Obama, is still golfing, and he's sending his kids on their spring break to the Bahamas and to Utah, but he canceled White House tours to make people think that there's something terrible happening. But I try to look at things from a perspective of a person who's just living in the everyday world, and the sequester hasn't touched my life in any way, and I haven't heard anybody that I know who's had the sequester impact them in any way whatsoever.
It has impacted, Jim, us here in Canada. Trying to cross the border, they've cut back services at the border. The stupidest place to cut costs.
And they're probably doing that on purpose. I
mean,
at the same time that they said they had to make all these cuts, they then were able to spend $1 billion to put more missile defense on the West Coast for the imminent attack from North Korea, which is, where did the $1 billion come from?
Yeah.
I think yesterday Obama announced a new brain initiative or something, or a study of the brain. $100 million he just gave for this effort. Where'd the $100 million come from? I thought we were cutting all these costs, and the government was running out of money.
All kinds of spin going on in the media. Let's talk again about Montgomery County, and you've been driving around there for quite a long time. Tell us what you're seeing on the streets of America.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote an article 6 months ago about my drive around and seeing all the empty retail units and the empty office buildings, and just generally the decay, I guess you could say, of the general conditions in the country. You just see things falling apart. You just see lights out. You see signs that are falling down. You just see sort of a general, disarray in the country. And so, it's 6 months ago I wrote this article, and it got quite a bit of reaction and people sort of agreeing. Since then, the stock market's up 15% to all-time record highs. So I'm thinking, things must be getting better if that's what the mainstream media says. But I've been driving around lately, and the number of available signs on office buildings and in strip malls I've never seen so many signs. I've never seen so much vacancy. So I dug into that, and you find out that the vacancy rates in office buildings and in these malls are still at near all-time highs.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow the loan write-offs by the Wall Street banks are back down to normal levels. It just doesn't make any sense.
How's this for spin, Jim, from the Wall Street Journal today? U.S. malls, they say, are outpacing smaller retail centers in their recovery from the downturn. Average vacancy at malls in the top 80 U.S. markets, so they're being selective here, fell to 8.3%, down from 8.6% last year. Terrific news, huh?
Yeah, except that they don't tell you that the normal vacancy rate over time is close to like 3%.
Yeah.
So they're crowing about these vacancy rates that are at 8 something, and truthfully, the companies that report these vacancy rates, this is all self-reported information.
Sure.
So there's nobody out there analyzing this truth. These are landlords self-reporting their vacancy rate and self-reporting the rents that they're getting.
So it must be true.
Yes. So you have landlords reporting to real estate companies who then package it into these statistics. If you walk around any of the malls, the vacancy rates are not 8%. They're easily 20%.
Yeah.
All you have to just open your eyes and walk around. That it's not true. And there's no way that they're getting rent increases, which they are also reporting. It's impossible that they're getting rent increases with those kinds of vacancy rates.
Jim Quinn from theburningplatform.com, our guest here on This Week in Money. Let's talk about a few of the things that have changed in the 6 months since you wrote your article, starting with the working age population. The numbers are kind of hard to believe here.
Yeah, what it is that somehow the unemployment rate keeps getting reported lower, even though the number of people employed is less than the working age population is growing. It takes, a very creative accountant to make that happen. So we've continuously gotten a lower unemployment rate over the last 2 years, even though the number of people in the workforce has gone up more than the number of people who've been employed. So if everything had remained static, the unemployment rate should be going up.
Mm-hmm.
But what has been happening is that the BLS reports that millions of people are leaving the labor force willingly while they're in their working age. This is not because the working age population ends at 64. So this has nothing to do with boomers retiring.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, the statistics show that workers over 55, the number of them in the workforce is soaring because they're so desperate. Because Bernanke has destroyed their savings with 0% on their savings, that they have to work now to make ends meet.
Boy, this is a telling number. The number of Americans entering the food stamp program in the 6 months since you started writing about it. 1 million new Americans, bringing the total to 48 million, 1/5 of all households.
In what recovering economy do 1 million additional people go on food stamps in 6 months? And it's even worse when you look at the economy has officially been out of recession since late 2009, and since the recession officially ended, 15 million more people have gone on to food stamps into the program. Wow. That alone should just tell you that everything being reported by the mainstream media is completely false, because the reality is people can barely get by right now. Their wages are falling, their real wages. And that's the thing. People, it's almost like the government and the media count on the fact that most Americans are ignorant of statistics and math and what inflation really means to their lives.
Jim, here's a number that you really can't spin, and it is just an unbelievable number. The national debt in the last 6 months in the U.S. up by $750 billion with a B, $billion.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that's 6 months. So you annualize that, we've been adding debt at a rate of $1.5 trillion. But you keep hearing from the media that that the national or that the deficits are only $1 trillion a year, and that's because they're using funny money. I go directly to there's a web page where you can check out the national debt by day, and that is always higher than the deficits that are being reported, and that's again because of the way the government accountants account for interest and Fannie Mae and all of these other things that are left out of the calculations. So the thing that really gets you is that the debt has gone up by $750 billion, but our GDP has only gone up by $150.
Oops.
So for every it's taking $5 of debt to generate $1 of GDP.
We're talking to Jim Quinn from theburningplatform.com here on This Week in Money. And we'll get back to what we talked about right at the top here. If things are so bad on Main Street, why are we hearing all this great news about how things are doing so well on Wall Street? What's the disconnect, and how do we get around this?
Well, it's the disconnect is occurring because Bernanke and the government are purposely pumping $85 billion per month directly into the veins of the Wall Street banks, who then just turn around and use their high-frequency trading machines to buy stocks. It's almost like it's collusion between the Federal Reserve, these banks, and the government to create a false recovery. It's the article that I started yesterday is basically it's titled "The Subprime Solution." Their plan is to just do the exact same thing that got us into trouble in the first place. The whole economic disaster was caused by subprime mortgages. So their solution right now is to use subprime debt for autos. The numbers came out, I think, 2 days ago that 48% of all the car sales in the last year have been through subprime lending.
Wow.
Which is amazing.
That is unbelievable.
I mean, I don't know what the subprime is a nice little term that might not mean anything to somebody, but subprime means you're a deadbeat. You have defaulted previously on debt.
Yeah.
That's how you become a subprime borrower. So these banks and the government through and actually a lot of these loans are being made by Ally Financial, which was
General Motors,
to be the old GMAC.
Yeah.
And is still 80% owned by the federal government.
Wow.
So the federal government has complete control over this lender, and is telling them to loan to subprime borrowers.
Jim, you go into great detail on the blog about the state of malls in America, and one of the scariest trends is the fact that boomers, 10,000 boomers per day, turning 65 for the next 18 years. What is that going to do to spending, and what's that going to do to the malls?
Yeah, I mean, people are focused on what's happening this very moment, but the fact is, if we've got tons of data that show that people's spending habits can be graphed demographically, and it makes total sense. Your highest spending years are from ages 35 to 54.
Sure,
that's your peak earnings area. It's when you're making your most money. So prior to that, you're a young worker and you don't have a very high salary. You have some debts from school and things like that. And then as a senior citizen, you're not working anymore, and so your income goes down, so your spending goes down. So what we've got here is we had a huge, the boomer group is such a huge number, but they're going out of this category. They're headed into the 55-64 and the 65 to 74 range, which spends significantly less than you do when your peak earnings years. Like an example is the people between 65 and 74 spend about $41,000 a year. People in the 45 to 54 spend almost $58,000. That's a huge drop off. And with 10,000 boomers per day turning 65, that's over the next 19 years.
Mm-hmm.
that means that spending is going to be demographically going lower, no matter how you cut it.
You don't have to be psychic to see that the healthcare costs for this group are just going to go through the roof at the same time.
Oh yeah, I mean the Obamacare, it's hitting now. I've seen it hit. I work, for the biggest employer in Philadelphia. Our fiscal year starts July 1st, so we're in our open enrollment period right now. I went to a meeting last week where they explained the changes from premiums and co-pays and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And my annual premiums are going to go up 20%.
Ouch.
And I work for somebody who has some leverage over insurance companies. Small businesses are going to be wiped out by this. And, the people who aren't working for big companies who have to buy this coverage on their own, it's going to go through the roof.
Jim, let's talk about the population, and you tagged it perfectly in the blog here. You say, we've got an aging, savings-poor, debt-rich, obese, materialistic, eye-gadget-distracted, proudly ignorant, delusional populace that prefers lies to truth and fantasy to reality. Boy, did you nail it there.
And that's the best part of our country.
There's also a dark side.
Yeah, I mean, I write sentences like that sort of to grab people's attention. But I mean, there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, especially the delusional part. It's like, the average person just doesn't, they're not thinking. They're not thinking. I mean, they're still going heavily into debt. They're borrowing against their 401k plan. I mean, some of them have to do this, but a lot of this was choices we've made as people in the country over the last 30 years. I think there's blame to go on both sides. I do believe that the people who run the country have used, Edward Bernays type propaganda to convince people that they didn't really need cash to buy things. They've trained people that debt and buying, a nice car and a big house on tremendous amounts of debt actually makes you wealthy when it doesn't. It just enslaves you. So we're sort of stuck here, and I think we're a little bit too far gone. I mean, you've probably seen the big to-do that David Stockman's caused in the last week. Mm-hmm. He sent me a copy of his book. Prior to, he's actually a reader of the Burning Platform, and he emailed me and said he wanted to send me a copy of his book before it came out because, he liked what I had to say here. And I have it here, next to my bed, and I was looking at the index, and some of his chapters are almost identical to some of the things that I've written.
Sure. The
warfare state, the welfare state, things like that.
Always good to hear from Paul Krugman, and here he is commenting on Stockman. He says, Stockman's stuff, it's cranky old man stuff, the kind of thing you get from people who read Investor's Business Daily, listen to Rush Limbaugh, and maybe if they're unusually teched up, get investment advice from Zero Hedge.
Krugman, he went into a tizzy because it was his own newspaper that actually published the op-ed that got everybody, riled up, and I think Krugman was upset because he thinks he's the star of the ball, and and Stockman comes on talking truth, which Krugman has a very hard time with, and he just says it like it is. And Stockman, he held no prisoners. I mean, he ripped Republicans. He worked in the Reagan White House, but he's ripped Reagan, Bush, he rips the neocons, he rips Obama. He just tells it like it is. And what it is it's a crony capitalistic country, and it doesn't matter what party. They're all part of the problem. And he just lays it out there, and some people don't like that.
Jim, I love this line from your blog. No amount of propaganda can cover up the physical, economic, social, and psychological dissent afflicting our world. And for boomers, here's a quote from an old Creedence Clearwater song. There's a bad moon rising.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be I don't want to be a doom and gloomer, but the people that I read and respect, John Hussman and Carl Denninger and Mike Shedlock, they're all of the same view that we're close to a tipping point here. But still, the market went up dramatically again today. I don't understand it, but it almost seems like there's an effort to ramp the stock market and to purposely hold down gold and silver through the use of derivatives.
You hate to use the word manipulation here, Jim, but boy, it sure seems like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, they're printing $85 billion of money out of thin air every month, and the Bank of Japan is now going to make the Federal Reserve look like a piker.
Yeah, no kidding.
The amount that they're doing the same in Europe, and somehow gold and silver are being kept down. That just doesn't make any sense. But with paper markets and derivatives, and basically the Commodities Exchange Commission not regulating your J.P. Morgans of the world, they're able to do this through, like you said, through manipulation.
Jim Quinn from theburningplatform.com here on This Week in Money. And we're talking earlier about a delusional population. This jumped out at me today. Speaking of delusional, a stunning $1.5 million gold dress going to debut at the MTV Movie Awards. Magnum Gold Ice Cream Bars, the sponsor. They've partnered with an American designer to create this dress. Brazilian model and actress Caroline Correa will wear the golden dress, which was inspired by melting ice cream during the MTV Movie Awards.
That's funny.
You can't make this stuff up, can you?
It's a sign of the times, I guess. Times are getting very interesting. I've written about this. Some people go along with it. The fourth turning situation, where, like you said, 80 years ago, fourth turnings happen every 80 years, and basically we're in the crisis period of where basically the social order gets swept away. The existing social order. There's usually a lot of chaos. A lot of financial problems, and eventually war. It certainly seems like, things are heating up in the world.
Now, Jim, for folks who have not been to your blog before, give us a little thumbnail sketch of The Fourth Turning. I know it's something you talk about a lot on your blog.
Yeah, The Fourth Turning was a book written by Strauss and Howe in 1997, where they basically were able to go back through history, all the way back to the 1600s, and map out 80-year periods, which they called, these were cycles, where we'd go through 20 years of different cycles, and there would be a high, there would be an awakening, then there would be an unraveling, and then there would be a crisis. And each one of these was generally 20 years. And they could pretty much plot that out through American history.
Okay.
So you had your fourth turnings, which were crisis periods, where they were a revolution. Then 80 years later, you had the Civil War. And then 80 years later, you had the Depression and World War II. We're now 80 years further along, and we're now basically, and I've actually met Neil Howe, and we've talked about this, and he's concluded that September 2008 was the start of this fourth turning, and it's going to. The disturbing part is that these things last 20 years.
Okay.
Generally, so we've got until the mid 2020s before this crisis is over.
Okay, so we're early in the fourth turning, 4 or 5 years in. What's the outlook for the next couple of years? What do you think?
I think we're about, usually by this time or around this, what they call is a regeneration occurs, where the country comes together and rallies around something. Like by the last fourth turning started in 1929. By this time, people had sort of rallied around the New Deal and Roosevelt, and at least the country was sort of together at that point. At this point, the country is not together, and I think I think the next thing that would happen would be the next phase of this financial crisis, which would be worse than 2008, which would then rally people around someone. I don't think it's going to be Obama, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now,
that seems to be the next phase, and I would think that that's going to happen in the next 2 years.
That's scary.
Yeah, I mean, fourth turnings are not pleasant times. I mean, if you think about it, the last fourth turning, 65 million people died in World War II. The American Civil War was 700,000 Americans died. So it does not look bright for the next 10 to 15 years.
Don't want to appear delusional here, Jim, and I'm not always looking for good news, but is there any good news in all this?
If the American people can rally around and come to the right conclusion after the crisis gets to the next phase, that's the hope. Could we rally around someone like Rand Paul or somebody like that? So, someone who's talking common sense. There's very few politicians out there that I see that are talking sense. Rand Paul seems to have inherited his father's sense, and he actually has a plan to really cut the budget, and they would be real cuts and not these fake cuts.
Yeah.
Because any of these cuts, even that they've announced, aren't really cuts. They're slowing the pace of spending. That's all.
I guess the scary thing is, you and I talked about, when we talked last time, we talked about Ron Paul and his farewell speech to Congress. And the wild card here, again, is the mainstream media. Fantastic speech and totally underreported by the media.
Yeah, there's very few out there that give him the proper... I think there's a couple of stations that let him speak occasionally.
Yeah.
I think Neil Cavuto actually seems to let Ron Paul on quite a bit, so I respect him for doing that.
More from James Quinn online at theburningplatform.com. It's a great site. Want you to check it out. And Jim is also on Facebook and Twitter. Jim, as always, great to talk to you, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
After the break, Tim Wood on This Week in Money.
The best of the best. Randy Elvis Frisky and his Las Vegas show band. 40th Anniversary Aloha Tour. This April in Camrose, Edmonton, Red Deer, Drayton Valley, and Lloydminster. On sale now. Details at randyelvisfrisky.com.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Tim Wood publishes Cycles News and Views. Tim covers the stock market, gold, oil and gas, treasuries, and the U.S. dollar. Hey, the April issue of Cycles News and Views is out now. If you'd like more on Tim's work with Dow Theory and the cycle turned indicator, visit cyclesman.net. Cyclesman.net. Tim, welcome back to This Week in Money.
Hey, Phil. Thanks for having me back.
It has been a great year for stocks so far, Tim. All three major indexes positive so far, down a little bit from yesterday's all-time closing highs. Got a shock yesterday. The Dow Transports dropping more than 1%. Now, why are the Dow Transports important to your work, and should we be worried that they're dropping like that?
Well, Phil, it's just a little non-confirmation going on at this point. Back in January, when both averages managed to better their previous secondary high points, we had what is termed a bullish primary trend change. Many people looked at that at the time, or I should say it wasn't until after the industrials moved to a new all-time high that many people looked at that in that light and said, okay, the Dow theory has given a so-called buy signal, which, there is really no such thing as a buy signal. It's a trend change. And I'm not picking, that's not a play on words. When you read the writings from the original, writings from our Dow theory founding fathers, they would anticipate a trend change and start taking a position ahead of that. And they called it buy and sell spots. And, they did that based on their feel of the market, read of the market at the time. And then the move above and below a previous secondary high or low point was used as confirmation, and they termed it a primary trend change. So there is a difference. That's not just a play on words. But according to orthodox Dow theory, that happened back in January, and not with the Dow moving to, or with the industrials moving to a new high. So that said, yes, that's in place. but I have my doubts. I really have my doubts because this is occurring late in a stretched 4-year cycle. When you look at some of the underlying, breadth issues with the market, it still looks like a bear market rally. And we saw something very similar back in the 60s and during that 66 to 74 bear market period. There was a number of, there were several bullish primary trend changes, a couple of which occurred right at the tops. And so what I'm saying is, I'm not necessarily saying that this one has occurred right at this top, because again, we're still looking for all of our DNA markers to fall in place, and when that happens, I think it'll cement the deal on the 4-year top, and so on and so forth. But my point is that it happens, and so on the one hand, you have to respect the bullish trend change and take it for what it is. And, we've been saying since the 09 low occurred that, hey, this thing's going to go higher until we see our DNA markers. I know that sounds like a broken record, but it is what it is, and that has not changed. When you look at these underlying technicals with the market, it still looks and smells like a bear market rally. Yes, it's at new highs. And no, we have not seen our DNA markers. And yes, now we have a bullish primary trend change.
Tim, nobody. Sorry, Tim. Nobody can predict the top of the market. It looks like we're having a kind of a rounding top. Nobody knows the exact peak, but every time we get to a market top, it seems in the last little while that I've been talking to you, Dow theory starts to be quoted in the financial press. Here's a quote from Market Watch: "If you're a student of Dow theory, then it's your time to buy."
And see, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's the fear. I think it's occurring right near, let me say that another way. It's occurring very, very late in a 4-year cycle advance, and with underlying technicals that are awful. And so what I think this is I can't help myself. I'm looking at the data. It's not just some opinion I'm clinging to. I'm looking at the data. I think this is a very dangerous situation.
Okay, Tim, so finish off this sentence for me. If you're a student of Dow theory, then it's what? Time to do what?
Well, if I just look at Dow theory alone, hey, buy, both hands.
Yeah.
Go. I mean, it's an all clear signal. But do you remember the article I wrote way back, I think it was in 2011, with the decline into the 2011 low? And I wrote an article, several of them, and I explained that not all Dow theory so-called sell signals, again, it's really a bearish primary trend change, are created equally. And I said back at that time that the market would move back above, or should move back above. At that time, that was the May 11 high, and I said that no, this isn't a valid signal. Yes, it is. Well, let me play on words. Let me clarify.
Okay.
Yes, according to orthodox Dow theory, that was a valid primary trend change, just as valid as this bullish primary trend change is. Absolutely. If we only look at orthodox Dow theory. But I looked at all of my other stuff, the underlying technicals of the market, the DNA markers that were missing, and so on and so forth. And I wrote an article that was published on your site and others, and we talked about it. And I said, not all Dow theory bearish trend changes are created equally. Mm-hmm. I think that the statistics, when you look at the entire picture, it's telling us that we're moving into a secondary low point, and the averages should move above the May 2011 high. I'm saying the opposite here.
Okay.
Yes, we had a absolute bona fide valid, according to orthodox Dow theory, bullish trend change. But when I look at everything else, I'm very, very suspicious of it.
Now, one of the things that you and I have covered a whole lot, and you're telling us again this time, we should remember this time, that it's not just Dow theory. There's much more to understanding what's going on than just simply Dow theory. That helps you. Explain to us again what the DNA markers do and how your work kind of piggybacks on top of Dow theory.
Yeah, the Dow theory paint, it's one piece. And the DNA markers, Phil, it's like a checklist. It's a list. When you break the market down into cycles of like degree, and cycles contract, they expand, they breathe. And so the problem then becomes, you go, well, how do I know? Just like this cycle, it's extending. Just like the 4-year cycle advance out of the '02 low, it was the longest 4-year cycle in history. Of course, it had help from the Fed. And there was a lot of people that came out and they said, oh, no, the little decline into 2006, that was a 4-year cycle low. We now got the all-clear signal as we went off up into '07. And I said, no, because we did not see the DNA markers. What are the DNA markers? It's just a simple set of common denominators. We've gone back to 1896 and have looked at this at different levels, be it an intermediate term cycle, the seasonal annual cycle, the 4-year cycle, whatever cycle, and I found these common DNA markers. And I go, well, at these cycle tops, this happens, and that happens, and this happens. And then you quantify it and you go, well, this has happened 80% of the time, and this has happened, hey, this one's 100% of the time, this one's only 50, so this one's kind of iffy. And you do that at the tops and the bottoms. And so then you can paint a picture. It's detective work. And then as we move in, and like I've been saying, ever since the '09 low, I stick to that. The data tells me it's a fake out rally. Yes, it's lasted much longer than I thought, but we have not seen those DNA markers. Everything tells me this is just like '06 and '07, where we have the stretch 4-year cycle. And when we see those common denominators start to fall in place, then it's going to be a warning, and it will mark the top, just like it did in '06. I mean, it absolutely called the top in '06 and in 2000. And I don't mean 6 months after the fact. It worked. And so we're looking for those same DNA markers to fall in place here. And when they do, I think it's going to be hell to pay. Until then, this thing's going to go higher.
Until then, it's party time.
Until then, it's party time.
Tim Wood is our guest here on This Week in Money. He's from Cycles News and Views. And got a quote here from Richard Russell in the March Dow Theory letters. This is kind of interesting. With the industrials and the transports both in record territory, he says he thinks being in the market, as opposed to getting into the market, is justified under Dow Theory. What do you make of that?
I agree under Dow Theory.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with him under Dow Theory. And Russell is a purist. He looks at Dow Theory and not this other stuff that I'm looking at, and I'm not taking anything away from Mr. Russell whatsoever. I totally agree with that statement. It's when I look at these other things with the cycles, with the DNA markers, the underlying technicals that was discussed, that we talked about before we started recording, and it was discussed in the April letter, so on and so forth, Phil, that's the things that make me skeptical.
Here's another quote from Richard Russell, and it's interesting. You talked earlier about the influence of the Fed. Here's Richard Russell. By taking a position in the market, you're casting yourself on the side of the optimists, and you're also casting your vote on the side of Ben Bernanke and the Fed. He says, if the Fed has any intention of taking its foot off the gas, his guess, the Fed will provide us with a whole lot of early warnings.
I can't disagree with that either. And, you know, the Fed in their action, if you think about it, that's now become an underlying fundamental of the market. I mean, the market has become so dependent on, you know, on the Fed's actions that, you know, hell, that's a fundamental these days.
So, Tim, where do we go from now? What does your work tell you is just over the horizon?
Phil, I think that we are moving toward, in Dow Theory terms, if we don't have it, we're close to a secondary high point. I'm not so sure. I'm seeing some signs of things trying to set up, but I'm not so sure that there's not unfinished business still to the upside. After we get this intermediate term top, I have to see how things develop. I think we're near an intermediate term top, and then that's going to give us a chance once we roll over into that intermediate term low, which will correspond in Dow Theory terms with the secondary low point. That's going to give us a chance to see things set up. And either one of two things is going to happen. It's going to set up in accordance with the DNA markers, or it's not. If it does, you know, it's kind of like a flow chart. If it does, then, hey, party's on again. And if it doesn't, then, hey, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. But even if it does, then, you know, again, it's a stretched 4-year cycle. It's a very, very dangerous situation, and it's a matter of time till it sets up. And so you just, as long as it's positive, you know, you got to follow the trail.
Got to quote Richard Russell again. You couldn't have said it better than this from the March Dow Theory letters. My intuition tells me there'll be an early period of erratic and uneven, scary advance while battered investors work up the nerve to enter this market. Then, Richard Russell says, the action will smooth out as the crowd gathers courage and confidence. Finally, in the last stage, we might see the averages rise in parabolic fashion. This will be the time to pack our bags and get the hell out. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I'm not sure what time frame he's talking about there, but, I'm thinking, it's almost like we've seen a mini parabolic rise here.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, from an orthodox Dow theory perspective, hey, it's all in. But knowing what I know about the extended 4-year cycle, the statistics there, which I covered some of that, I think, in the March or February letter about these extended 4-year cycles, and the how that typically ends, from a statistical perspective to give us some guidance. I feel, yes, like I said, I really think this is much like that 06-07 period, where you have a stretch 4-year cycle, but then from a Dow theory perspective, I'm afraid that it's also like that 68 and 73 period.
My guest is Tim Wood from Cycles News and Views. Hey, the April issue of Cycles News and Views is out now. You owe it to yourself to get some professional advice here. If you would like to subscribe and get the benefit of Tim's analysis, that's simple. Visit cyclesman.net, cyclesman.net. And if you want to get in touch with Tim, you have a question or two, it's tim@cyclesman.net. Tim, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, sir.
Phil, it's always a pleasure to be here, and I urge people, like I said, I genuinely, based on this data, feel the how fragile and potentially dangerous this situation is. I say potentially dangerous. Once the nut cracks, it is going to be dangerous. But I urge people, please read the article posted there, Dow Theory Buy, and really, now's the time, like you said, to look at some of those statistics and understand what's going on, because it's like I said, it's sending the investor. I started to say mixed signals. Actually, it's not. I mean, with the markets at new highs, hell, it looks good. It looks great.
It's a pretty clear signal. Yeah.
It's a trap.
Tim, thank you. Have a great weekend, my friend.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks to our guests, Jim Quinn and Tim Wood. And thank you for listening. I'm Phil Mackesy. We're back next week with more This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.